We have to keep calling out climate change hysteria, I think, where we see it, without downplaying the seriousness of things like the bushfire situation around the Grampian regions of Melbourne, where dry lightning strikes tonight could still cause fires to ignite. But for the last 3 days, people in Melbourne have been warned about today, Wednesday, being potentially the worst fire weather conditions since Black Saturday. Well, the Bureau of Meteorology issued again predictions of catastrophic weather, and this, of course, then triggers things like school closures in the regions where it's described as catastrophic. Businesses close, and I know locals out that way complained a few weeks back when it was declared catastrophic and very little happened. Now, the media has to wear some of the blame here. For days and days and days in Melbourne, commercial radio, the ABC, plus commercial TV news services have been rattling on about blistering hot weather. V-line trains, that's the country services, they've all been placed on limited running times. But by mid-afternoon in Melbourne, the mercury had struggled into the low to mid-30s. Earlier in the day, just before lunchtime, I had my windscreen wipers on as light drizzle fell and there was zero wind. Now, the wind's up a bit now and we can't predict what might happen in the Grampians. Let's hope everything's okay there. Now, Victoria's not alone with this problem, though. We've seen major forecasting errors from the Bureau around the nation, including massive rain events that were not predicted at all. Interestingly, as I said, I'll talk tonight with Lismore's Steve Krieg about that on the second anniversary of those tragic floods that hit his town. They destroyed 9,000 homes. They had little or no warning of the severity of that flood event. Now, all that brings me to in my opinion, an hysterical report carried in the 9 newspapers in Sydney and Melbourne today. Now, the Sydney version online was headlined, "The Effects of Climate Change on Your Suburb and City Revealed." And you can use your postcode to find out what's going to happen. In the Age newspaper in Melbourne, a more alarming headline, "Grim Warnings Over Climate Change Heat." Now, before I explain what this panic merchant piece based its alarmist conclusions on, let me read to you some of the more absurd claims about what the climate will do to various places around Australia. These stories were carried in the 9 papers today, if you believe it. Let's go. The Murray Darling Basin, Shiraz grapes in the Barossa Valley, the Ningaloo Reef in WA, and even the Australian Open tennis tournament, it's claimed in these newspapers, could, wait for it, come under existential threat between now and 2050. Look, I'm not making this stuff up. Those were their predictions. Dry rivers, no Shiraz, a dead reef, and no Australian Open tennis. It gets worse, if that's possible. Here we go. Melbourne, Sydney, Perth and Canberra can expect twice as many extreme heat days. They call extreme 35 or hotter, even if we meet our existing climate commitments. Now, someone should point out that Melbourne's just had its coldest January for decades. Laughingly, this report, and I can't believe a credible newspaper would run such alarmism, laughingly, they predict events out to 2090. 2090. That's 66 years from now. People born today will be on the pension by then. In 2090, it will, according to these predictions, be extremely hot in Darwin nearly every day. Well, isn't it hot in Darwin nearly every day already? OK, so who's making these wild claims? Well, no surprise, the usual suspects. The Climate Council of Australia, headed up by our old mate Tim Flannery, who of course famously predicted back in the early 2010s that not even the rain that falls will fill our dams, his exact words. Now, just for Tim's sake, I checked today on his claim. Sydney's Warragamba Dam currently is 98% full and has recently been spilling, so technically it is full. Melbourne's water storages sit at 93.4%. The Goulburn Weir is at 95.88% full and Lake Eildon 95.78%. So how does Tim and his mates at the Climate Council come up with these grim warnings? Well, faithfully reported, as they were in the 9 papers, as I mentioned. Well, just so they can scare the true believers a little more than they made 3 calculations. They calculated what will happen if globally nations take no action to reduce emissions, what will happen if existing action is maintained, and finally, what will happen if, their words, necessary action is taken. And of course, a gullible media report what would happen if no action is taken. Well, seriously? Nations, including Australia, have been bullied into taking climate action way beyond what is necessary for decades now. But if you don't have a good old scare campaign every now and then, like predicting our dams will never fill, then you don't have a job, do you?